Joining us tonight. I'm Meghan Doherty. I'll wave. I feel like when there's a panel, it's hard to know on Zoom who is talking. Although once I really start talking, it's not hard to know if I'm the one talking because I can't actually keep my hands still. It's like pretty much impossible. I'm trying right now, but I'm already failing. So, but we'll try to be clear who's speaking when it's one of the three of us as we get into.
It might be possible to tell.
I didn't want to presume that. So, but yes, the timbre of our voices is a little different. So thank you all for joining us tonight. I am Meghan Doherty, the director of the Museum of the White Mountains. It's great to have you here in person and those of you who are able to join us on Zoom. As we gather today, we're all on Indigenous lands. For those of you joining us from home, I encourage you to learn more about the Indigenous presence in your area, both past and present. Those of us at the Museum of the White Mountains are on Indakina, which is the ancestral and present homelands of the Abenaki, Pennacook, and Wabanaki peoples. And we're grateful for their stewardship of these lands and waterways. For those of you on Zoom, we put a link to a great resource to just begin your research about the history of your land. And I'd encourage everyone, if you can make the trip, we 2 weeks ago, time's a little fluid right now, went to Odanak, Quebec, and visited the Musée des Abenaki in Odanak there. And it's really wonderful, wonderful place to learn about the Abenaki peoples, both past, present, and future. So I encourage a visit if you have a chance. Our event tonight kicks off 3 semesters of collaboration between the Museum of the White Mountains and the Sustainability Studies program. And we're grateful that they wanted to partner with us as part of their National Endowment for the Humanities Spotlight on the Humanities and Sustainability Studies grant. And tonight seems the perfect way to kick off a grant that's all about collaboration, as we will spend the next hour or so talking about collaboration, how we all came together and what it all means to collaborate and what can come from that. And usually I would give a little kind of formal bio of our speaker, but I think tonight I'm gonna skip that and we're just gonna dive into our conversation because it will kind of come organically out of our conversation tonight. So just the briefest of introductions, I'm joined tonight. Usually this is the point in our events when I disappear from the front of the camera. I was persuaded to stay in front of the camera tonight. So I'll be in conversation tonight with Rita Leduc and Rich Blundell. So we'll begin at the beginning, wherever and whenever that might be. And so to get us started, we'll come this way across the table and each talk about how this story starts.
Okay, I guess I'll start then. It's a bit of a hard question, how it all began. I guess we're talking about origin stories. I'm a big historian, or a person who studies the history of the universe, cosmic evolution. And so for me, that question gets me thinking about origins. And, I could tell you my origin story. I could tell you our collaboration's origin story. We could tell, but I think it's worthwhile to just for a moment acknowledge the bigger stories that these stories are embedded within. And the reason is because it's instrumental. It's essential actually to the exhibition that's upstairs right now, is that we're trying to really emphasize and acknowledge the continuities between all things. And if you're going to do that, one of the best ways that I've found to do that is to tell the origin story that creates that continuity. In my field, which is cosmic evolution, that starts essentially at the Big Bang. I actually started a little earlier in the mystery before the Big Bang, but we'll just assume that first miracle, that there's anything at all, and go from there. That there's this history of the universe that's 13.8 billion years, and it's a story of increasing complexity that starts essentially in light. And then that light evolves into matter. And then that matter becomes the material of the first stars. And then those stars organize themselves into things like galaxies. And within those galaxies, new things emerge through either supernovas or galactic collisions. New planetary systems form with planets in them, like Earth. I've just jumped ahead. So we've just done the first 10 billion years, right? And now we're at, say, 4.6 billion years ago, the origin of the Earth. And what happened on the Earth. And, well, given enough time and circumstances and enough relational dynamics, molecules emerge and come together in ways where new structures, things like membranes, emerge from inorganic materials. Those membranes then go on to become proto-life. Life emerges from that. Then life proliferates. It withstands all kinds of challenges and disruptions and setbacks, but it goes on. There's this creativity that's inherent in nature, and life picks up on that intelligence and gets a foothold. First, unicellular organisms, multicellular organisms, then whole ecosystems of multicellular organisms. Dinosaurs come and go 65 million years ago. Continents collide, hundreds of millions of years ago. This region forms through volcanic activity and tectonic collisions and mountain building events. Plants colonize the land, animals from the sea follow. Hubbard Brook forms. And so that's when the story, this is the origin story of this project and this collaboration. And then back in, late 60s, my parents have a kid named Rich. Okay, jumping ahead. And so then, my story begins. And I grew up as a kid, mostly, in Cape Cod, really just a child of the forest down there. And what's really interesting is I've been doing a lot of developing geologic courses, like geology courses I'm stationed out on Nantucket right now, and I'm telling the geology of Nantucket. I was asked to put together a course on the geology of Nantucket. But what I realized is I'm actually telling the geology of New Hampshire, because it's all down there in a pile on Nantucket. In fact, Nantucket is a pile of New Hampshire geology. And so anyway, I grew up down there on the Cape, very much in the woods, getting scraped up and bruised, and I spent a lot of time in the woods, not a lot of time in school. Was not a good student at all. Had a little stint as a commercial fisherman. Had a kind of an epiphany one day out on a boat, and then somehow managed to get myself back into college, to study geology, biology, ecology. Then I ended up traveling the world sort of on the science track. I became a natural scientist. Did a lot of teaching in East Africa, the Caribbean, South and Central America. And then I got into the philosophy of science, and then ended up getting a PhD in cosmic evolution down in Sydney, Australia. When I finished that, I'm just sort of a mutt. I'm not really hireable, but I wanted to, share what I had learned. And what I realized was that I wasn't really getting a lot of enthusiasm from the scientific community, but when I worked with artists, there was a spark in their eye. They had a certain tolerance for what I was doing. And so I started looking for artists, and that's when I found Rita. I reached out to Rita. I saw her website. She was talking about how she loves nature, and she has this really interesting process by which she creates art. And I could see in her process so much of my own experience of being in nature. I could see symmetries that were really, really intriguing to me. And so I reached out to her, and I found someone really willing to explore and listen and take what we were feeling and seeing and experiencing in nature, take it really seriously to try to understand it. So I guess that's the beginning of our origin story. Do you want to kind of pick it up from there, I guess?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay. Well, so that he just like just casually dropped at our feet is the backdrop and the foreground of like this project. So constantly entering the headspace of expanded or extended continuities and stories is something that that's part of the practice. Like that's what we've been doing with the forest for 2 years. So it may seem like, why is he doing this? Why is he taking us this far back? I ask myself that sometimes too, but it's, like I said, it's the background and it's the foreground, and it's like, it is the thread by which this project has kind of blossomed. But once you have that, like, you can't really go about the world. You know, we were just talking last night about how like you can't even fathom what 13 billion, little like 200 million, just try, like you can't. And so you can't think about that all the time as much as he might like to. So what's great is once you can kind of accept it and hold it in a certain way, you can start your origin story elsewhere, because you know that it's a bit of a construct, and then you get to kind of play with it. Then you get to kind of jump around. So I'm going to jump us around a little bit. So like we met, we decided like, is he okay? Am I okay? We're okay. Let's figure something out. Let's do something together.
Is she safe to be in the woods with alone?
Yeah, right. And so I guess now I'll jump back. So I'm an artist. I grew up in South Jersey near the Pine Barrens. So kind of, you're going to hear some parallels. Like I grew up, my parents really like enforced like creativity and participation with the world. Like that was kind of, the problem solving tactic. So just with that encouragement and with like a natural knack for like feeling the world and seeing the world visually and trying to figure it out visually, I decided to just go for it and to pursue art. And so that took me to a lot of urban areas. I was in Philadelphia, and then I was in Chicago, and then I was in Brooklyn. And when I was in Philadelphia, it was the first time. I was in a tiny, like a town population of 2,000. And so like moving to Philadelphia, I needed to figure out how to feel like I felt at home. And so my art practice took me outside, because that was always the answer. It was always nature and creativity and merging the two. And so it was really kind of in these urban areas that I found my practice, because I was looking for the thing that gave me the understanding and the answers and the well-being that it gave me through trials and tribulations of my childhood. So and beauty too, like it was everything. So anyway, so that, so I became a professional artist. I got my MFA, moved to Brooklyn. And then by the time we met, I had moved to the Hudson Valley. There was a kind of a tipping point where I realized, like, why am I still in these urban areas? I actually want to reimmerse myself in the forest. And so I moved to the Hudson Valley, and I was doing work at residencies. Like the work was always place-based. And so I would go to different artist residencies, but what I would find is like, you go to Oregon and then you make work that's place-based in Oregon, but then you go back to Brooklyn, nobody in Brooklyn wants to, why would they show work about a salt basin in Oregon, in Brooklyn? Like it was really hard to like, oh, I have this whole body of work. And so I was trying to figure out, where can I go where there's like a community of people that care about a place that's already there, that's already developed. And at the same time, we met and we started talking, and let's do something together, let's figure something out. And we were introduced to Lindsay Restad, and she was really excited. She was the lead ecologist at Hubbard Brook at the time. She was really excited about bringing art in. And we were really excited about the idea of the experimental forest, because we were about to embark on an experiment and we didn't know what was going to happen. And it was really about like, okay, you have a practice of understanding the world or trying to understand the world. And I have a practice of trying to understand the world. And what happens when we try to understand the same place together? And so that was the origin of the project. And we loved, because we didn't know what was going to happen. We knew we knew that if we could trust each other and the place, if we create this triangulated relationship with enough like curiosity and vulnerability and trust, and hold that story, hold that whole cosmic story, and like revere it and really try to participate in it as part of it, that something would happen. We didn't know what it was going to be. And so it felt really, it was like a risk, and it was an experiment. And we were in it for the long haul. Like this is a long-term ecological research forest. And so we were like, what would happen if we did long-term ecological research that was merging kind of the sciences and the creativity? And so that's what happened. And now we're here. And
and I brought you here.
Yeah.
And you know, we've been talking for a while now, but recently about kind of origin stories and how did we get here? And as many of you know, some of you on this Zoom know quite well, I was born here, right? I was born in a small town of 300 people north of the mountains. Suppose at this point in my life, I'm willing to say that I am from Dummer, New Hampshire. We can have all the jokes later. But I had to leave. Like I had to. I could not stay. And I've been thinking a lot, you know, as we've been talking about how drawn we all are to these mountains, I've been thinking about why I had to leave. And I think it's about the future, which I think we're going to get to, and we're going to think about how we get from the Big Bang to the future all in 1 hour. And I think so much of the conversation about the White Mountains is about their past, right? Whether it's their geologic past, whether it's, you know, the history of tourism, the history of the region, the history of artists coming in the 19th century, right? It's all this very past-based narrative. And as an 18-year-old, it's like, well, none of that's for me. I need to get out of here if I'm going to have a future. And I know I'm not alone in that feeling. And I think that in part, your work, your project gives me kind of hope for the future, right? That there's ways to think about the future of the White Mountains in what you're doing that, I mean, I probably couldn't have seen it as an 18-year-old if I'd encountered it, but that weren't apparent to me. And I think for me, I had to leave and come back and find myself through who knows what threads led me here, at a museum, you know, directing a museum that's about this place that even if I had to leave it, it's always been home and special. Like I've known that. Like as soon as I was gone, I was like, why am I in this land of gray? Like everything is gray. All of the south side of Chicago is gray. It's just big and gray and gargoyles and like what was I thinking? And so for our kind of, you know, I come into this story spring of 2022 of just, you know, getting my feet under me in a new role, putting together an exhibition, thinking about seasonality and change, how the seasons change, how the climate's changing, looking for ways to tell that story in a forward-looking way, not only talking about the loss and the way, you know, there was some of that in the exhibition, but also looking for ways to tell that story, to think about that change, that tipping point, in a way that wasn't just doom and gloom. And so I came across your work and also came across this, you know, sort of a project I think you'd been involved with Brodo Art-Sci collaboration and thinking about art-science collaboration and how, you know, thinking about this kind of, so if you have this collaboration between art and science, how does it get out into the world? And how do you sort of communicate that outside of, you know, you have this great stable collaboration and then what? And I really saw the museum as the space to make that accessible, right? To make what you were doing in the forest accessible, and that this seemed like the perfect place to do it. So we had those 4 animations the first summer, and learning about your work, I learned about other things that were happening at Hubbard Brook. And then we had Field Station that was this kind of retrospective of the first 10 years of art science collaboration at Hubbard Brook. And now we're kind of taking a deep dive into what the two of you are working on with the forest.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Do you think that what we're doing fits the model of art sci that you had originally like art science, meaning like when artists collaborate with scientists. Did we disabuse you of the idea that we were an outside project?
Yeah.
And if so, like how? Like how has it evolved for you in terms of like?
Well, and I think what we saw in Field Station was this kind of spectrum.
Mhm.
Like there's a spectrum of what that looks like, and that they're expected outcomes. And so if we think about art science collaboration, first things first often is kind of data visualization, right? Essentially graphic designers helping scientists to communicate their results, right? Or we think about other kinds of, visualizations of data, not necessarily in whether it's video or things like that. Or we think about scientific illustration, right? That's like another kind of expected outcome. And the great thing about that exhibition was then we had other things that pushed on that in different ways, right? Not just your project, but other pieces of what we had in that exhibition pushed on those expectations in different ways. And I think that what you guys are doing is like setting all that aside and saying, what if we actually don't think about this as a binary and think about what is like synthesis and the sort of dissolving of boundaries rather than like holding these two things in this like tense binary.
Yeah. So I don't know, I'm piecing some things together. Like, so first of all, it just hit me like you returned here. We neglected to mention that we both have histories in the White Mountains. So coming here together to work on a project was significant for both of us.
All of us.
Well, right. So so like that was really amazing to have that happen all the kind of, because we came fall of 2021. You came,
right, which is when I came to interview for this job.
Yeah,
October
so like
21.
that's kind of crazy. But like the phenomenon that you're describing, there's a consistency here of like when I just talked about the cosmic story and being able to kind of jump around it once you kind of hold it. Like there's these binary, like we kind of assumed the role of the artist and the scientist, but then we kind of broke it open. Like sometimes I'm the more pragmatic one and he's like creative, like kind of out there. Like it, and so the boundaries are constantly blurring. So there's this constant dance that I hear you talking about, and I hear you talking about, and I feel of like, okay, we're gonna accept the construct, we're gonna break the construct, we're gonna accept the and like when you do that, that is what puts the whole, suddenly you can see this whole that I mean, I don't want to say it tells you something because there's not like a thing to get, but it like offers something that is fuller than anything you could ever get if you just accept the construct and stay within that. So if you never move back, or you never, the jumping around or the entering in and exiting out, like that kind of breathing, like breathes life into it. Yeah.
I guess I would just want to expand out what you were starting there about the art sci collaboration, and how I think what we're trying to do, but what we're end up doing is expanding out the different ways in which artists and scientists can collaborate. Like you mentioned, there's these sort of simple ways in which artists can come in and be the visualizers and be the artists to serve the science. And then there's other ways in which artists can actually participate in the scientific research, help scientists with their research design. They can help generate ideas on research questions. And that's really important in our active participation in the scientific process. Then there's other ways which are like, how do we sort of inspire the next generation of STEM, young people, get them inspired about science? And how do we share also like the excitement of discovery? This is one that we got from Lindsay Rustad about how can we share the excitement of the scientific process? Those are all really important ways in which artists can work with scientists. But then we want to go way beyond that. And so what we do after that, we put all that sort of we just described in the center. And then we have this thing called the sublimation layer, which you can kind of think of as like a paradigm shift. And we're operating outside of all of that and saying, no, actually, we want to collaborate with the whole of science and art to shift the consciousnk of humanity toward a different way of being in the world. That's not typical art sci collaboration, okay? Like we want to use this project to show people how to have a more meaningful relationship with nature that can help solve deep systemic problems that are like becoming existential to our species. That's not written into most art sci proposals.
Well, and I'm going to say something I know is true for you, and I wonder actually now if it's true for you, but like, why did you go get your PhD, Rich? Like, why did you go into science? And why did I go into art? And like, we've talked about the fact that like, we went into these things, not because, so speak for myself, like art is not the end goal. Like art is the byproduct of the search for meaning, for the bigger thing. And for you, like, so it's art is like the tool, art is my language. That's how I search. Science is that for you. I'm wondering how this is resonating for you, but I think like, because what he just said sounds so big, but like just on personal scales, it doesn't feel big to us because it's just what we've always done with our craft, with our practice.
That's what I'm saying. It sounds like a perfect job for art, frankly. That's why. That's why.
Right.
I'm looked for you.
Yeah.
Well, I think for me, I ended up in art history because it was a way to tell stories about people, right? Like I came in through the door of material culture. And so thinking about understanding the past through the everyday things, right? Through our cups, like how is it that there's, and like that there's something we can know about the past by studying this kind of residue. And it's not just I was never really, don't take this the wrong way. I was never really interested in oil paintings. But it was the kind of stuff of every day that got me interested in art history. And then thinking about working in museums as a way to tell those stories. And I think the thing that's kind of kept me in museums is the collaboration, right? We're like circling back around to the beginning here is because you get a PhD in a humanities field, you spend your life in a library, Carol, and you spend your life alone in the library, Carol, and it's you and old books in my case. And it's a very isolating.
Well, that's kind of what we're trying to address here is that the humanities don't stop. They don't start and they don't stop there. Why? Why is it? Why do they stop? What is this artificial division between where natural history and human histories? There's no real boundary between those two disciplines. And I think that it's been a real disservice, and we're really starting to feel the impact, the injury of that false dichotomy, that false division between natural history and human history.
Well, that's why I ended up studying scientific illustration, right? This like gets us back to why I think this has worked so well because, my academic background is looking at scientific illustration and how artists were critical in the 17th century for communicating new knowledge that the kind of, for a shorthand. So I don't have to say natural
we
philosophy.
have a theory. We have a theory that actually the era that you were working in, that you were excavating in, was an early time for science. It was young. It was the 17th century. It was Enlightenment science.
Pre-Enlightenment.
So it was super young. It was adolescent.
Yeah.
And the people who were doing it didn't have the institutionalized segregations that we have, that we've inherited, right? And so there was a vitality to it. It was alive, and it had all that energy, and like, so you've been mingling and you've been steeping in that.
Right.
And so now we come along and we're in that.
Right.
We're like crossing those boundaries again. And so that's our theory, that's why you're secretly excited by this.
Yeah.
Because we're trying to figure it out.
Yeah, we're trying to figure
I think that's right, because I think that was something,
What was it?
almost
Was it
2 years ago. Yeah. So Robert Hooke, best known, if he's known for, I guess there's some chemistry laws, but whether you retain those is a whole nother thing. But he's best known for his gigantic microscopic images, right? So the flea that folds out and is like a
Talk
bodily
about fun, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's true, right? He trained as a painter. He, did all his own, lots of his own drawings for his scientific experience. He was the curator of experiments for the Royal Society. And I think that kind of lack of divisions is definitely what drew me to the 17th century. And I think what you're saying about the kind of human history is natural history, that line, and I think the ways in which they were trying to understand the world by describing it, right?
But I think we're now starting to really feel the injury caused by that. And we're at some point, if we make it, we're going to look back at that whole era and be like, boy, that was unnecessary. That was a wrong turn. That was a detour. And we're trying now to like come back to reunite, to create the continuities between nature and humans by traversing the whole story of how nature became humanity, how nature became art. In fact, art is nature's creativity. Like that's what you see up there on the walls, is you're seeing the creativity of Hubbard Brook, the forest, showing up through the artist on the walls.
That's the extending.
Yeah.
I was just about to be like, we've done it. We've made it to our second question of the evening, which is that I wanted us to kind of parse the title of the exhibition. So this talk is worth 3 days, Fridays. Yeah, 3 days before this exhibition opens. And so the exhibition is titled Extending Ecology, Making Meaning with the White Mountains. And I had to stop about 3 times and make eye contact with Rita to make sure I had those words in the right order, because
they're carefully chosen words.
They're carefully chosen. We spent a lot of time working through what exactly the title of this exhibition was, which preposition in particular we wanted that to be, whether we wanted ecology to be so a previous iteration of your collaboration was called Ecology Extended. So why did we decide that we were extending ecology rather than ecology had been extended?
Yeah, I mean, because we're still doing it. Like, I talk about myself as a conduit, or like a sensor through which, so there's the project, like we're emissaries. We use all these different words to describe this idea that we're kind of going in and absorbing and listening and participating, and then we like get something out, like meaning. We get meaning, which we'll get there, and we need. It's like you can't just hold it, like, so it needs to. There's this like just impulse to like extend it, like it's just however you can. And so so Ecology Extended, it was like, well, that was kind of back when we were like, is it going to extend into us? Like, I think that's what it made sense at that time. Like, we're going to go in this experiment, we're going to just experiment, we see if ecology extends. Is it going to extend into us? Well, it did. And so now we're extending it further. So I think that's kind of what was happening when we decided. We were like, oh yeah, no, it has to be extending ecology. It's still happening. And actually the hope, I mean, we have got like, Nikki and Michelle are coming, and they will now do a performance in response to the exhibition. They are now receiving it, extending it. Like, how can we create this? You throw a stone in the brook and it ripples out. Like, the brook is forever changed. Like, how can we do that ourselves? Like, that's participating in the story, right? So like,
yeah, I would also add that this kind of goes back to Descartes, who's like the bad guy. He's sort of the villain here. He was the guy that sort of made this big separation between, material and mental. And the term extension or extended it's speaking back to that idea that, they believe that the mind is an extension of matter. And it's that too. But it's ecology extended. So what we're doing in our sort of understanding, ecology is really a matrix of relationships. And it's from those relationships. In fact, it's the relationships are essential. If you look, and I know this because if you look at the entire history of the universe, nothing happens without relationship. We can go all the way back to the cosmic microwave background radiation, which is like the first documented relationships of light in the universe. And it's from those relationships that the first stars emerged. And that story extends all the way to here. But the point is just that nothing happens without relationship. Relationship is creativity. And so embedded within those relationships is a kind of intelligence. It's the intelligence of nature that existed before our intelligence. We think of ourselves as intelligent, and we are, but we are extending nature's intelligence. And so we're picking up on that idea of extending the intelligence of nature into this building. So we go out and we're with that intelligence in the forest, and we open our intelligence to it, and we embody it. It gets into us. And the idea is that it's a creative intelligence, and that creativity then extends into us. And then we create, and what we create then it embodies that intelligence, and then that intelligence ends up on the wall of the exhibition. And then the idea is that people come in and then they engage with that intelligence. And this is a space of cultural creation. Art creates culture, and that's what's going on here. And so the idea there is that we're extending the ecological intelligence of that forest through us, through the art, into other human beings who then go out and create a culture. And the idea ultimately is that that culture then will be infused with the intelligence of nature, and that our culture will be more aligned with nature because of that in some small way. Because a culture that's not aligned with nature is going to be a pretty short-lived culture, which is kind of where we can see the glimmers of that now.
Yeah, and I think I want to maybe pick up on that, like, what does it mean to be aligned with nature? And I want to try to tie it in to the word collaboration, because there's certain expectations or standardizations that are starting to happen with the understanding of what a collaboration is and looks like. And the collaboration with Rich and the forest, I would call it an ecological collaboration. And there's something that's happening where we're doing this dance together, where like sometimes we stay in our own lanes and we just like play next to each other. And like, I call it parallel play. Like, we just don't bother each other. We just let each other do our things, and we respect that. But we also it still kind of starts to get into you. Other times we're directly collaborating and bouncing things back and forth, and with the forest too. And so there's this like porosity, like we become permeable, but it's a dance. Like sometimes those pores tighten and sometimes they open, and other times like I jump over here and he jumps over, so it's ecological. And so the word with was important because obviously we keep talking about the forest, it's our third collaborator. This couldn't have happened without like all of the, and I'm gonna hand you over the meaning word, but this couldn't have happened without the with. Like, we really had to feel like we were participating with the forest was letting us in, we were opening up those pores, and this collaborative dance was happening. Again, it goes back to that, like that breathing and that breath. But like, when he says, would you say being nature or natural? Like when he talks about reflecting nature in what it is we're doing, that ecological way of collaborating is different than these sort of standardized ways that collaborating is starting to become like, what is a collaboration? Check off these boxes. And so it's different. And so when he talks about nature and reflecting nature, we're trying to trickle it up, because this ecological way of being and relating and having relationships is so much more real and like alive, and it furthers life just in the way that he described it in the cosmic story. And so if we don't reflect nature and be nature in how we interact with each other, that will get severed. And if that gets severed, like, we're in trouble. And I think, I don't know, you could pick it up from there.
Sure. The other thing I would add to that is that when you do this, you realize you're not just collaborating, like we're collaborating with an incredibly powerful creative force the creative force of nature that created us. So there's no more powerful force to collaborate with than that. And so I just think, and talk about meaning, like one of the people, we work in a lot of different sort of communities out there in the web, and there's this one cognitive scientist that we deal with, and he's coined the meaning crisis, that we're in a meaning crisis. Our culture's in a meaning crisis. And I guess that's true. But when you spend time in collaboration with nature and you feel its creative force, you're like, meaning crisis? We are so awash in meaning and beauty and creativity. And it's just absurd that we would find ourselves in a meaning crisis when we are the recipients of this story of nature, like, and it's in us. And like, here we are, like at the cusp of this, like, and by the way, all of this is unfolding in a moment when technological advances are about to just completely disrupt everything we think is normal. Like, we're in the next decade is going to be so different than this decade. So, yeah, I guess I'm not sure if this is picking up where you left off, but
no, it is. This is what did you do there? Yeah.
I guess I'm just saying that, yeah, that's what we're doing here is trying to demonstrate what it means to reconnect with this natural, we call it the creative life force of the universe. And that's like, sounds like woo-woo, but that's like no joke. I can say that as a scientist, you know, that we're collaborating with the creative life force of the universe and trying to make it palpable.
Yeah, I want to like just reiterate how like in our origin stories, we each went into our respective fields in order to find this for ourselves. And like, we go to place and we listen and you know, it created it. Like, it's just, there's a humility and like a reverence and like and it's just all you want to do is like listen and hear it. Like, it's so that like the rigor, like we're like, we can't not go because it gives us. And so the meaning is so that's the meaning with, again, I guess.
Can I just point out, we're doing this at a long-term ecological research station that normally only does science. So she just used the word humility, reverence. We're talking about joy. We feel a lot of gratitude, beauty, all these words that you don't associate with scientific research. So we're like kind of walking that fine line too. Like, what are you guys doing here? Like, that's not what we do here, but that's what we're doing there. And, you know, Hubbard Brook, the experimental forest has a history of really innovative, groundbreaking research. That's why we know about acid rain. And it's because of Hubbard Brook and the research that happened there. That's largely why we got a handle on it. That's why you don't hear about it as much anymore. It's because of the work and the research that was done at Hubbard Brook. And we think that this work that we're doing about reconnecting us to nature could be just as important and profound, but in a completely different way. It's about, this is the experimental part. Like, Hubbard Brook is an experimental forest. Well, this is the experiment of our time. Can we get people to fall back in love with the earth, nature, and let the benefits of that relationship trickle up into the intelligence of our civilization. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say
that's like, meaning, by the way. I mean, if that's not meaning, I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is. That's meaningful work. That's meaningful research.
Right. And so like, just as in the beginning, when he gave you the whole 13.8 billion year story, like he keeps expanding it out, but I'm just going to like bring it back in and be like, okay, I could listen to him as someone who's not me and be like, that sounds like so big and such a statement. But I'm sitting here knowing that when I go and practice and participate with the forest, that what he just said happens to me. It happens to me, and I can't deny that. Like, I know it happens to me. So the question is kind of like, how can we scale it, or how can we at least offer it back out, communicate it, share it in some way? Because it's not, we can't just keep it to ourselves. It's not what it's there for. It's actually kind of impossible to do that.
So how can we, Megan?
I think that's where I come in,
Yeah.
right? Isn't this the role I play in this?
Why we're here.
Is by providing space, right? And a different kind of place, right? Like this
Entry
is, yeah, and providing an entry point into what you're doing and also an entry point for our kind of multifaceted community, right? The museum kind of holds different communities together. As we're at this kind of boundary between campus and town, between, students and the community and folks who live here and folks who come here to visit. And I think that's, this is all why I was so excited to bring this project here, because it seems to me that this is the place it makes the most sense to provide a platform for that, because the folks who come through our door, they're like 3/4 of the way. Well, maybe 3/4 is a lot, but although they're already on their way with you because they care about this place, right? You walk into the door of the Museum of the White Mountains because you care about the White Mountains, right? There's like something about this place that, whether you're here and we're like the perfect rainy day activity, or you're here because you chose to come here for college, right? I chose to go to Chicago for college. 4,500 other people chose to come to Plymouth, New Hampshire for college, right? So they've already made that choice in our students. And so I think that we're already on the path with you here at the museum. And so thinking about how we can, and this is where, I see the hope and the future, right? That this isn't just about what happened 13 billion years ago. It's how do we equip ourselves for the world that's coming, and how do we get to a place where we can make choices that make so there's continues to be a world in the future, and a world we can recognize. And even if it's not exactly what we recognize, but we can still exist.
I want to point out something that you said that's like yet another fractal, which is like the way that you just described this museum and the ecosystem of this museum, that it's liminal, that it's like, I call it like hallway space, that like there are so many, you talked about it's a museum of a place. It's not a museum, it's not an art museum, it's not a science. It doesn't exist in a silo. It's this ecological space. And so it's just been so like capillary action. If we're in the forest existing in ecological relationships together and with the forest, and we've got this project and it's all in this ecological relationship, and then it enters into this museum that is also existing in this liminal way. And with the exhibition, we tried to like create a space that also is liminal, doesn't really lean too far right, too far left, too far science, too far art, too far history. Like it's just trying to be not. And like the museum is being not, and like we are being not. I'm not an artist, he's not a scientist, I am an artist, he is a scientist. And like, what is that even? And so when the question is like, how do we future? Like, that's how we future. We be not, I don't know, now I sound crazy, but we like, we exist in this liminal space together and create ecological relationships that mimic those that have taught us how to be for 13.8 billion years.
I think we should open it up to questions. I feel like that felt very like,
Ooh, yeah.
That was like a great summation of what we're doing here or what we're not doing here. Unless are there things
I guess you had brought up earlier about wanting to talk about how the humanities can play a role in sustainability, and to kind of touch that question. And I think that this does or can potentially do that by restoring humanities to restoring it to really an essential place. In fact, elevating it again, in some sense beyond the sciences again, to restore its place as a force for a humane reality. Okay. But in order to do that, it needs to restore its roots into nature again, and restore the kind of like the natural order of humans in nature, as part of nature, as nature. Like, and that if you're going to talk about sustainability, we need to be asking ourselves, why aren't we sustainable? So instead of trying to like create sustainability, ask deep questions about why have we become the only unsustainable species, organism on this planet? And I think it boils down to, well, just do the quantitative analysis. We consume too much. That's why we're unsustainable. Well, why do we hyper consume? Well, because we feel hungry, or we feel unfulfilled so we try to fill the unfulfilled feeling. And that's what we're trying to do here too, is to say, you know, a relationship with nature is pretty fulfilling. And it tends to alleviate that sense of, I got to consume something in order to feel home, feel full. You don't. You just need to relate in a different way with the world. And that's what we're trying to kind of communicate through this work, is how to find meaning again. That's a humanities endeavor, but it's infused with science. There's a video room up there that says, and outside it says, every syllable of this exhibition is infused with science. It's not just science, but a scientific worldview. It's not just one research agenda or one outcome of some stuff. You know, nitrogen is hugely popular at Hubbard Brook. The word nitrogen doesn't show up there upstairs, but we're excited. We're excited about nitrogen. What's the word? What did I say?
I don't know.
Nuts about nitrogen. Is that it? We're nuts about nitrogen too, but knowing about nitrogen, we need more than that. You know, we need to feel at home again, not just know that nitrogen's a problem. So that's what we're trying to do here too, is to like really consummate the promise of all this scientific knowledge by bringing meaning to it through the arts. So yeah, that's why it's still a humanities and sustainability endeavor, and worth supporting in that way, I think.
Yeah. Thanks. So there we are, our first spotlight on the Humanities and Sustainability Studies event, and Rich has tied it all up neatly in a bow for us. And I think we'll transition to questions. Kayla or Jade, would you pull up the chat and help me kind of manage? This is where I can't be in two places at one time part of hosting an event is going to come in.
Wow.
And
are there any questions out there?
Yeah, there's
if you want
questions.
to look at those and I'll work them.
Yeah.
Is there anybody have any additions or questions or anything?
Do you have a vision of like, what are some actionable steps that you would like to see taken by the scientific community in response to your work?
It's a great question. I mean, there's a lot of answers that come to mind. I don't want to be flippant.
Well, I mean, my answer was almost like they don't need to. Like, they're doing really important work, and they need to do that work. And I think, you know, like even art-side collaboration needs to happen. Like there's a place for all of this. We're just trying to figure out ours. So
I think just let us do what we're doing. You know, and take us seriously. You don't have to like even take us seriously, actually, just get out of the way. Don't stop us. And I think if you pay attention, if you let us do what we're doing, you will come to appreciate what we're doing, and you will realize that we're not doing pseudoscience. We're not doing science at all, actually, and we're not the enemy. We are trying to really value the knowledge that good science produces. We're trying to really elevate the value of the knowledge that's being produced, but not get bogged down with the more less pressing questions. Just do good science. and let us operate in the cultural sphere on the periphery, which is what enabled us to do. And so I need to really emphasize how much we appreciate the way that the Hubbard Brook community has opened up this opportunity. And, we really are determined not to let them down, and to do anything that's like unscientific. But we're not doing science. We're doing communication of science. And I just think that, that's it. Yeah, okay, so that's not a practical step, but I guess just get out of the way. In a friendly way.
Well, yeah, I mean, when Rich tells the story, in some of the workshops we do, he uses science to make space for the creativity. And I think that's part of what I would like to see happen in all disciplines. So it's not always the case that the boundaries should be blurred. Sometimes you do need to stay in your lane and do your work well, but there's room for everybody at the table. And so again, it's that sort of that ecological shifting and balancing and dancing so that no one feels scarce, no one feels shoved out of the way. It's actually just like, no, the more the merrier. I think that.
And by the way, as somebody who's trained in the sciences, I understand that impulse to want to protect the rigor of science. I get that 100%, because way too often what I'm trying to do gets misappropriated by one thing or another. And so I get that. I don't want to turn this into a,
I think it's like, it's the mentality of abundance, like allowing for this space where we can kind of coexist and do what we came here to do in our own individual ways of understanding this place so that we can piece it back together and get that meaning that's going to help us figure out the future.
And we're not even asking for funding. So just let us.
Yeah, actionable. We get us on the phone with NSF. That would be helpful.
Yeah, write them onto your NSF.
I wouldn't want to take funding away from this funding of good science either, though. This is a different endeavor.
Yeah.
Kayla, can you scroll up to David's So David had a comment about early modern, but then I wanted to think about extending a little bit more, and extending also has etymological connections to stretching in time, extending the time we take to dwell within the intelligence of nature. I think that's a great piece of this, because I think that's another thing that happens when we went to Jaron, right? We didn't really get all the way into the grammar, but it's that openness that extending has, both in terms of space, but also time, I think is really great. And just wanted to kind of touch back to that in David's comment.
So it implies like slowing down, you mean? And what's the word? Not silencing, but just quietness, or what?
Well, and I think partly it's that, right? It's like taking the time to be quiet, but I think also this idea that it's boundless, right? Like it's extending.
Yeah.
It just keeps, like, there's no end, which
goes to the consuming thing. Like, yeah, so like you can be filled up with nature's meaning, but what gets you there is being filled up, at least for me, sensorially. Like it's so, when you really shut off and open up, it gets in and you're like so full that you actually, like, I want my house to have nothing in it when I come back in from the forest, because there's just, I'm swimming in multisensory everything. And then the meaning is a fractal of that comes with it.
I think where that definition of extending really applies to, or at least where I experience is in the intelligence as extending. Like we think of intelligence as like us, like we're the epitome of intelligence. But when you go into the forest or any ecosystem, any healthy ecosystem, and you feel man, there's an intelligence there. That's so much, like there's a deep intelligence. That's like limitless intelligence. that's at work there. And it doesn't end with us. And so we're gonna need to come to terms with that intelligence is, it's there for us to participate in or not. But yeah, so thank you, David, for that, because I definitely see that sense of extension of intelligence. It's inexhaustible.
It's like so generous, you know, like, and so you just, it's then the gratitude, you know, and then it's just a cycle.
The meaning kicks in.
Yeah.
I have a question that I think Marcia actually posted up there that got me thinking. How do you,
Scroll back to that.
as the artist, right, like going in, and whether you're the artist now or the scientist now, whatever it is, but how do you take everything you're feeling? What are your techniques for actually capturing that and putting it up on the walls? Like, I haven't seen anything up there, but how do you take something that is existential, is so beyond humans, but yet you're communicating with your humans, you are humans, so you're at the center point, whatever you're gonna embody. How do you remove that layer of just like humans to it?
Yeah.
I mean, you should let us know if we did it okay, because we tried. But I mean, for me, it just always comes back to like, how do I need to do it for myself?
Yeah.
Like, so I'm trying. We process things as humans, right? Like, I'm trying to understand. I'm searching, and I'm trying to process what I've gathered, and then spit it back out, and then get more, and there's these conversations and this triangulation and all of these. And so in order to understand it, I have to visualize, I collect. So I go and I collect like data. It's like visual data, and I play with those back in the studio. Like we have conversations, and like, so like sometimes I'll like save text threads or like take notes, but there's just a constant, just like in the forest, everything is in constant movement, change, flux. Like the relationship, the conversation is, again, with the forest as well, is in constant, it's just this constant swirling. And so what you see upstairs is like the byproduct of, it's almost like as this thing is, if you picture a tornado and things get kind of shot out of it as it goes, like it's kind of like, so there's that. So that's kind of how we end up with concepts and object, like art objects. But then for the exhibition, there was a whole thought process on, okay, how now do we make this presentable? What's the phenomenology of the space that we want to create for other people? How do we extend the phenomenology that we feel and the relationship, this ecological relationship? How do we create a space that might also be like a not space? Part of what we were really trying to do was, I was like, guys, I just don't want it to feel like an art show. Like, it's not an art show. It's not a science museum exhibition. It's not a natural history. Like, it's none of those things. So how do we create a space so that when somebody walks in, it disrupts all their narratives of what they think it is. And so we tried to make decisions. I think both of you can speak maybe a little bit more on those decisions. We tried to make decisions that would help keep people in this liminal space. The tricky part of that is that the entry points aren't going to, no one can get through every single entry point that we've offered. So sometimes there are inaccessibilities, but other times, but the hope is that there are multiple accessible entry points for any given person who can kind of come in and engage.
And I think one of the things to note as well, especially for folks who haven't seen the exhibition, but when you do see the exhibition, is that it could feel like it's not just one artist, right? They're pretty distinct bodies of work because they're from different moments, they're different approaches to the forest, right? Winter is a very different time in the White Mountains than the kind of season of fecundity and mushrooms and fruiting bodies everywhere, right? Like, you feel the forest very differently. And so you can, I feel that in different parts of the exhibition, you kind of feel the different moments of the forest, and the work looks very different. And then the panels that Rich has written and that Emma Wilbur, our student graphic designer, has designed, provide you with a portal into that moment. It's not the only portal. It's not, there's nothing definitive about what we're doing. It's not, we aren't saying think this way about the art, or the art is meant to be this, but rather here's an opening into a conversation that we'd like to invite you into. And as Rita says, like, it won't all work for everyone. But the hope is that with these different portals, there's a space for each of us to see a model we might replicate of being in the natural world, of
And
listening.
that's part of being in nature, is that it doesn't, like, just yesterday, you know, we're hiking and he went one way and his leg span is bigger than my, so that, like, it didn't work for me. I had to go over, like, so we just see these things replicating and scaling in different ways as we so it's just like, yeah, in a forest or in anywhere in nature, not everything is pleasant. Not everything is there for you. Not everything is meant to, like, it's just, and so you're constantly adapting too. And so I think, and to the point about the, you know, the work, there was a time where that was like a really horrible thing for somebody to come into your studio and be like, looks like this was made by 5 different people. And, you know, I'm like, oh no, I need to figure out how to make art that looks like it was just made by one person. But no, because when you are engaging with relationships that change, the work actually should look different every time you engage, because then you're responding to the change. And so the panels that, you know, the text that Rich wrote does a really nice job of like creating this kind of thread of continuity and conversation and entry points through words, but then moments of distinction as well. So, yeah.
I just want to make sure that that was your question. Like, your question, what was your question?
As somebody who hadn't seen what was above, everything and I found my own avenue through which you could proceed with that. And I was just curious how you did it, what your craft was. So yes, that was it.
Okay.
So, but you could follow up. So Rita's explained how she does it.
Yeah.
But then how do you engage with, I'm assuming you engage with the work that she has. And then you were involved in maybe an earlier process of that and then connecting them all. So
I heard a different question.
maybe it was a better question. You should go with it.
The question that I heard said something to do with how do you find the continuity between the work and, you know, sort of as a human and nature, dealing with the subject of nature, how do you find the continuity and maintain, you know, like your own integrity as an identity, while also collaborating with nature as a collaborator? Like, was that not?
No, that's a great question.
There was a layer of that, because there was like you know, you're thinking about this creative intelligence in nature, but you're filtering it through a human.
Right.
So yeah.
That's the human part.
Yeah.
And that I come from that sustainability perspective. Like, humans are getting in humans way. You made that clear, right? You're our own problem, whatever. So how do you try to, you know, evoke this feeling of reconnecting?
Right.
While not, you know, in a certain way, you want to divorce yourself from being human to try to engage with what you are humans.
That's right. And my answer to that would be, if you know the story of how we came to be, like if you really know some details, and then it becomes inescapable that you are nature. You don't walk around thinking, I'm in nature. There's a part of you that lives as nature, as belonging. There's this like really abiding sense that I belong here. And I take that for granted. That's my ground assumption. That's the deepest sort of like, that's the deep expectation that I hold, because I happen to know I can trace in a very continuous, logical, propositional series of events how I came to be an expression of the same forces that are at play in the forest as it decomposes, or the fungi and the mushrooms in the tree, or the way the birds sing, and it's just like this is me, you know. And so, and apparently that's not ubiquitous, apparently. Okay, and so I think that is what we're doing here, and I'm constantly reminding Rita of that by telling her, the science that I happen to know, how, do you know about the phospholipid bilayer? It's the earliest cell membrane that came about, and it's this permeable sort of has miscibility, which means that biomolecules can move over it and through it. And through that process, the forest can actually kind of communicate, because it communicates its inner states to you when you're in it. And guess what? You're communicating your inner state to it, because it also has that same phospholipid bilayer. And so we're constantly sort of like reminding ourselves that we are part of this family. And so I think that is how we maintain the sense of being human and nature at the same time, and as we create. Maybe I wrote into your question, but that's the question I want to answer. So I'm answering.
So happy was this for her.
And I would just add, I mean, he just gave you a little nugget of like what it's like to go on a hike with him, because like what happens before he dives into that is he gets so excited. He turns into like a 7-year-old and gets so excited about something that he's seen in the forest, and we get excited, and then he jumps into the science, and I'm like listening and trying to retain it, but also like getting this like phenomenological experience. And so like it's not a linear like we do this and then I go make the work and then he writes the thing. It's this very organic back and forth.
It's
and
true collaboration.
Yeah. And so like, we had a whole conversation about the labels in the show where we were like, do we put separate labels, or what do we call the text and the art? Like, because the text is not describing the art. The text is not telling you what the art means. The text is like parallel playing, just in the way, like we're like, how can we make the art be me and the text be you, just in the way that it happens when we go on a hike? How can we do that? And that's kind of what we try to do. And then I'll also just maybe add that there's a whole pair of panels that talks about kind of left brain, right brain, that kind of whole conversation and that's going on right now in neuroscience. And that his text panels kind of trigger the thought that like, oh, these are going to give me an answer to this art that I don't understand. But in fact, they're poetic and scientific, and like their narrative, like they also are liminal. And so they actually just soften that kind of quantitative left brain being that we've been
disrupt the left brain hijack that happens.
Yeah, like we've been trained to kind of go operate in the world in this left brain way, whether we like it or not. We all kind of are affected by this training, and so his panel is trying to soften that so that you can then re-enter the art in a way that's just a little bit softened, that maybe you couldn't enter it before because you weren't yet soft. So these are all sort of the things that we were trying to figure out, and it's again, let us know if it works.
Other questions? We're pretty much out of time, but there's another question. And Jane, I see your comment there and really I think it's showing up because even though it was direct to me, it's showing up because my texts are up there. So yes, let's talk. And I definitely want to hear more for sure.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you both. And thank you to my colleagues who came to the museum with this idea of partnering on NEH Spotlight on the Humanities and Sustainability Studies grant. I feel like I at least think we've kicked this off in a really interesting and thought-provoking way. And David's so if you were interested in the comments that David's hearing made in the chat, be sure to come back on November 1st. So he's coming to campus from Duluth to speak with us on November 1st. October 24th, Daniel McCaw, who's the fisheries program manager for the Penobscot Indian Nation, will be joining us. That one's on a Tuesday at 7 p.m.
People can get to us. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh.
But I was just going to say, people can get to find out about us through either Oika or Rita's website, ritaleduc.com.
Yeah, and if you're nearby, come and see us on Saturday. So Saturday, October 7th at 4 o'clock, Nikki Tulp and Michelle Erard will be doing an improvisational responsive performance to the exhibition, in the exhibition at 4 on Saturday. And then from 5 to 7, we'll have a reception. Nikki and Michelle will be there, Rita and Rich will be there. I'll be there. It'll be a great time, give you a chance to see the exhibition, live with the exhibition. And then you'll probably need to come back again because the opening is never the best time to experience it. But
Yeah, and I want to say 2 things. One is that the show is up till December 15th, so it's up for quite a bit of time. So, but also like I'm sitting here and I'm just like, this is like the extending is happening. And so I just want to underline, like, you know, this started 2 years ago with like me and Rich in the forest, and it, you know, Hubbard Brook community started to kind of come in, you came in, and like, I'm sitting here right now and like, I just feel the extension, like the relationships are, the fecundity of it is really palpable. And so I just wanted to thank you and just express my gratitude and enthusiasm and just like how palpable that really is. Like we came up with this idea, like, let's see if we can go create this relationship and figure out how to extend it. And like, thank you. So
Thank you.
okay, there we are.
Going back and going to Hubbard